Well, Sarah, it's great to be chatting with you again. Welcome back, and Philip, welcome to Good Movie Monday.
Thank you, sir. A pleasure to be here.
Another deep dive into the world of horror and the stuff we love. I've got to tell you, I feel really old. The fact that we're talking about the year 2000 retrospectively, that's terrifying to me.
It's 25 years ago, Glenn.
I know. I remember it like it was yesterday. But the obvious question first is just why this project? What about this era compelled you to adapt it into a film?
Yeah,
Um, well, for
sorry.
me, for me, it was my era growing up when I was like 10. I was 10 in like 2002. So that sort of time and 2000 onwards was like my era in horror where I was growing up watching all the films that were coming out around that time. So for me, it's kind of a special era in that sense. But Phil's kind of different, I think.
Yeah, I was 19, so I was a little bit older. So I was actually able to see these movies legally.
Yeah, mine
But
was
for
illegal
me,
for sure.
but much like yourself, Glenn, I was like thinking back and I thought nothing's really being done about what I thought was modern horror. But
Yeah.
then Sarah slapped me across the face and was like, this is like, quarter of a century ago. And I was like, oh yeah, it's not really that new, is it? And
Yeah.
then like why hasn't there been as much discussion around this era of horror as there were the golden era of the 70s and 80s? And so it's
Yeah.
just a case of us opening up the conversation, hopefully, to this era of horror, which is, we think, very, very good for the genre.
Yeah,
There
it
was a
is.
point.
Go
There
on.
was a point where Phil actually wanted to call it modern horrors or something like that, and I was like, bro, no.
It's funny. I remember like when all of that stuff was coming out, urban legend, things like that. Particularly, I was very snobbish at the time, thinking to myself like, "This has all been done before." But now, when I watch a documentary like this, it kind of gives me a whole new appreciation. I kind of cruised through that period, not really given as much attention as a lot of younger people did, or people
Yeah,
now do.
100%. Like, I think when you guys first sent me the screener after I watched the doco, and I was like, a lot of these movies that I kind of dismissed 100% at the time, like, this is just derivative crap. Like, I really don't like it. I didn't like any of it. Like, I didn't watch a lot of it. I didn't like what I saw. And because, it wasn't as good as the 80s stuff. And now I look back and that whole feeling is gone. So now I appreciate them on a whole new level. Like, I remember watching things like Hostel at the time going, geez, he's really trying hard, that Eli Roth, like really, really trying to be cool with this. And now after watching the doc, I went back and watched them. I'm like, Jesus, Hostel is like a great film, like really good, like incredibly sleazy, but in the best possible way.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's definitely a throwback to the 70s and 80s mentality for sure. But there was other stuff coming out at the same time. I mean, a bit earlier, I know, but like Ring from Japan, and then High Tension from France. It's like the new horror, new, the new at the time horror was kicking ass.
Yeah. Do you learn a lot of new stuff when you're listening to these people talk? And if so, like, was there anything that anyone said that was, new to you?
For me, the most interesting thing I took away from the interviews was one with the director of Serbian film, because he was talking very much when we get into the talk about the terrorism that was happening in that era, which obviously influenced certain films. When he's talking about a Serbian film, it's quite confusing how he says, obviously, it's not a horror film for him. It's like a comment about Serbia in general. And what I just found really interesting learning about how, when he said that he wasn't shocked that 9/11 happened, it was sort of thing that, obviously what was happening in Serbia during the 90s, um, just a lot of that stuff I think people don't really know about, and we weren't really told about too much on the news and things, and we all dwell on things like 9/11 but not realizing there's terrorism going on in a lot of other places as well. And I think that's kind of the point of the films that come from all sorts of corners of the world as well, with this sort of the impact of terrorism in that era.
Yeah, that really struck a chord with me too, and I'm kind of glad that you put that in the film, because I think it generates a new conversation about a Serbian film that's more rational than the previous ones. You know, it's something that people just like to either shit on or they're outraged by, but this actually approaches it in a very sensible way. So I'm glad that's in there.
Yeah, I'm a big defender of it because I think people like to dismiss it. A lot of people haven't even seen it and they'll dismiss it with the idea because they heard about the baby rape scene, but it's not really like what it sounds. And it's not really the point of it, you know. I think you can overlook things like that if you have that temperament.
When these people are talking and you've got a lot of people in front of your camera, do you ever feel like they're overreaching or full of hot air? Because I quite often feel like a lot of these people are quite into themselves when they're talking. Do you secretly think that?
Who are you talking about?
I'm not going to say. I'm not going to say. I guess that's a no.
Phil can take this one.
I'm still thinking on the last question. But yeah, who's full of hot air?
All right, we can backtrack on that. You can backtrack.
Okay.
You can backtrack to the last one if you like. Last question.
Yeah, because for me, I was a film snob myself back then, so the remakes were something I was actively like a hater on. But hearing Jeffrey Reddick, the writer of Final Destination, who wrote the Day of the Dead remake, just drive home the fact that these are people, man. They got jobs. This is literally a job. So we can shit on those films all we like, but it's literally someone's livelihood. So yeah, it kind of brought in a very personal aspect to the film industry that I don't think some film fans tend to appreciate.
Yeah, explaining the whole reason why there's so many remakes and things like that. Absolutely, that was a great point of conversation.
The thing that really strikes me when I went back and watched a lot of those kind of 90s and early 2000s horror films was the soundtrack. Like that music doesn't seem to really exist anymore. And looking back on it now, I found it pretty jarring then, but I find it really jarring now. That kind of, I don't know what it is, like new metal, industrial kind of music that, like, you watch it. I find, like, I really liked it at the time. I really liked Dracula 2000, but now I kind of watch it and I find it really difficult to watch all of the stuff at the start where they're doing the robberies and stuff, because the music just really kind of throws me. And the season, listen, she's singing.
Like Roadrunner Records was just like the in thing with metal fans, and so horror and metal is like one thing, and so every horror film had to have a Roadrunner Records like soundtrack. Freddy versus Jason, Underworld, like everything just had to have a new metal soundtrack. Just part of the era.
Yeah, I always think of the Hitcher remake, because I'm pretty sure that starts off with All American Rejects, which is kind of just feels weird, but it kind of, I like it. It's like sort of my era of music as well. I was like an emo in that era.
Which is terrifying. So what perfect way to start a horror film than with an emo song?
Yeah.
So was there anyone that you really wanted to get for the doco that you weren't able to?
James Wan. I mean, he does nothing. I don't know why he's, so busy all the time. But yeah, he couldn't get.
Yeah, what's he up to? Nothing. Yeah, him. He would have been good to talk about Saw, obviously, because I think it's a really important film. But you can talk. You get other people to talk about it. It's fine. It's just it would have been good to know if he had any sort of thoughts about the social changes around the time of thinking up Saw and things like that. Especially because from he's Australian, right? And we didn't really have much input from Australia in this, where we had some really, like, we tried to get Greg McLean
said he'd do
from
it, yeah, but then
Wolf
a new
Creek
film came up, so he disappeared very quickly.
Yeah, and I think it would have made it a little bit better if we had some input from the Australian side, obviously, as well. So that's definitely a bit of a shame. But
you know what? I thought that Joe Lynch was particularly insightful, though, and he kind of almost became like an anchor of the film at some point. Was there a moment in time? Was it when you were talking to him or in the edit that you realized that, you know, he's a good focal point for this?
Yeah. I mean, his interview was 2 hours long, and he had something good to say about every single question. So it made he was the best interviewer. I mean, that's kind of how we then edited it around him. I mean, he was kind of surprised when he found out he was such a big feature of the film.
Was he the longest interview?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it helps that he's a horror fan himself, like a hardcore horror fan, which comes across his answers. So yeah, he kind of bordered on being a filmmaker and an academic.
I always find that funny with those kind of guys who kind of think they just think that everyone's as into it and as knowledgeable as they are about these things, and they're like, "Oh, what do you mean? What do you mean? Doesn't everyone like into all of this stuff and talk about it all the time and breathe it?"
Yeah, before we interviewed him, I didn't know that he was like that, basically. But he was really just really good, and he knew his stuff. And I think that's the best thing when you have a director who knows about the history of horror and things, because some directors don't know about the history of horror, and some critics don't really know how films are made. So you get that good balance with a director who knows.
Yeah, right. So and there's lots of clips in there. I'm wondering, like, what was the most expensive one for you to secure?
Baby.
Yeah, we just cleared it all with the lawyer, mate. We didn't pay for anything.
Fair use is a wonderful thing.
Excellent. So what are some of the movies from this era that are particularly your jam? Sarah, we'll start with you.
My favorite movies from the era. Wrong Turn. I love Wrong Turn so much. I just could watch it over and over again. I think it's hilarious. And definitely Wolf Creek is definitely not as hilarious, but I still love it because it's just really well done. And I also love Jeepers Creepers. It's a bit of a contentious one, but it is one of my faves from when I was a kid, so I'm not going to stop watching that sometimes.
Absolute banger. And Wolf Creek 2 is pretty funny.
That's another one. Jeepers Creepers is another one I watched after watching the doco. Was another one I went back to, which I thoroughly enjoyed it at the time. And I still think it's a great. Yeah,
so good. I just love it. It's actually really good. Like the first half hour, it does go a bit silly at the end, but like the beginning, I could just watch that over and over. Like when they just go past and see him dumping the bodies down.
Gives me chills.
Yeah.
And I remember at the time I thought it was the height of cleverness when the eating you license plate gag. I was
just
like,
I remember that too. Eating you.
Yeah.
Ben, that's what you say every time you go past that Macca sign.
Yeah, 100%.
What about you, Philip?
For me, there's so many. I mean, the French extremity stuff I absolutely adore. So, High Tension, Martyrs, Inside, Trouble Every Day, 29 Palms. But then some of the British stuff like The Descent and Creep, and Spain with The Orphanage and Pan's Labyrinth and Devil's Backbone. So
just name every film.
Thailand. Which country did we go to? Like, yeah.
I mean, I did find that
a period of amazing movies.
I did find that aspect of the doco fascinating about how British horror had kind of disappeared almost until kind of Dog Soldiers and stuff like that kind of rejuvenated the whole industry. Never even occurred to me that all of a sudden,
because everyone thinks hammer horror, right? So they think the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, but from the 80s onwards.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to, one of the other docos playing at the festival is The Children of the Wicker Man, and even I keep forgetting that was a flop when it came out.
Yeah,
it was one of those films that no one cared about, and it just completely blows my mind that when you look back on these things retrospectively, how impactful films like Dog Soldiers can be and Creep. And
think of like British horror from the 80s, Hellraiser. That's like the only thing people can think of. They weren't being made in a British film from the 90s. you could say Clive Barker again, but he was in America making like Lord of Illusion and everything else. So they're not British films. So yeah, it kind of did make a comeback in the early noughties, which has gone away again now, kind of. But
Yeah, it's gone away
that
again.
10 years, it was on fire, man. It was beautiful.
When I started working in distribution, I think there was all of that, Stag Night of the Dead, and there was a lot of direct-to-video British horror coming out. Zombie on the Moon.
Yeah, is that, we call it Doghouse here.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, I was gonna say, what is Stag Night
of the
of the Dead? Like Doghouse? Oh yeah, brilliant. Love that film.
Doghouse. Is that Danny Dyer? That's a great one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Stephen Graham.
Severance is the first film that I think, like, there's definitely this weird, which, because we don't really get EastEnders and whatever the kind of the soap stuff that Danny Dyer did, but when he's in stuff like Green Fingers, when he's really kind of young, he's not really at all like this kind of Cockney hard man that he kind of, he's like too young and too baby faced for it. And then by the time Severance came out, all of a sudden his voice, it's like he's
a hard man, right?
His voice drops, and the Cockney increases, and he becomes like almost a tough guy. And then every time I see him on panel shows and stuff now, and I'm like, what are they talking about? This guy was like he was like a pretty boy at the start of his career.
Yeah,
he
but
totally
he made a film here in Cardiff called Human Traffic, where he just played a drug dealing like party guy. Yeah. That's what he was for ages, and then he started in a film called The Football Factory, where he played a football hooligan, and it changed his life, literally.
Yeah.
Was he a bad guy in that film? Because I haven't seen that, but I do find him interesting.
The football hooligans, they're all kind of bad guys.
Yeah, but so there wasn't like an arc where he becomes a good guy or anything. No, okay. No. Well, I haven't seen that one. But he was like a hard guy, and then he's turned into like a nation's sweetheart now. Like everyone loves him. And it's partially because of EastEnders, I think.
Yeah, and his daughter, the fact that he named his daughter Danny Dyer as well, which is
she won Love Island. She won Love Island.
Yeah, it's the greatest.
Do you ever see that movie he did with Gillian Anderson called Straight Heads? It was really brutal rape revenge movie. So good. So good.
Did he rape Gillian Anderson in the movie?
I don't think he was the rapist, but it's
I was going to say, I thought it would be the other way around.
he teams up with her, doesn't he, and helps her get revenge. And she shoves her up some guy's ass at the end and shoots him.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm wondering, given you guys are so good at making these sort of documentaries, are there any favorite sort of filmmaking or retrospective horror documentaries that you love, that you look up to? I kind of feel like this one almost is a great companion to one from 2000 called An American Nightmare, because that brought the Vietnam politics into things, and you kind of do a similar thing.
That's so nice that you say that, because I think that's a really good documentary, and everyone always sort of names that as a really good horror documentary. So yeah, go on, Phil. Sorry, I keep talking over you.
Actual choice. So you beat me to it.
I do feel like if you watch your film with that one back to back, they're really good, like companion pieces.
Yeah, and it was an inspiration, because the way it looked at what was going on in the 70s, it's kind of unavoidable when you see the similarities between what's happening in the Afghan and Iraq sort of era versus the Vietnam era. And the parallel there, and it just became very obvious during the making of the documentary.
Yeah, 100%. Cool. Have you guys got anything else you're working on right now? Either individually or together?
Well, I can't remember if I what am I doing? I am considering working on a new documentary about Charles Band, but I really have to do a lot of work first to figure out whether that's viable. How about you, Phil?
That's a big story to tell.
Yes,
it is. It's really interesting, actually, his whole life, because of where he came from, and also like the amount of insane movies he's made. So, and no one's done it yet. So, I think I want to do that, but it does depend on money and things like that. So,
and then you've got the biggest stumbling block is Charlie himself, because 90% of what comes out of his mouth is complete horseshit. Like I literally, because I just put together a Full Moon box set. And we got Charlie, and I read his autobiography, or the one that he's the autobiography, the one he wrote, and you kind of like, you're listening to it and you're like, this does not gel with a lot of
I
other
was born
people's.
in a barn. 3 wise men came to deliver gifts.
Yeah, I think, I'm also working on a full moon box set and just interviewed him in LA the other week. And he is quite hard to get, he doesn't really like talking for a long period of time. And he always tries to bring questions around to like now,
Yeah.
what he's doing now, even when you want to talk about Puppet Master and stuff like that. So I don't know. I mean, I really want to do it. And I think he's a really nice bloke, and it was just we have to see if we can, I think it's a story, well worth telling, even if it will be a bit difficult maybe.
I feel like it would be like Mark Hartley's doco on Golan and Globus. I mean, everyone else said they'd only do it if Golan and Globus weren't involved. Well, I think
Yeah.
they would only talk if they didn't get to say anything.
Yeah, but then they went and made their own
They
documentary.
made their own, yeah.
Yeah, you got to be careful Charles doesn't go
Again,
and do his
question.
own.
Well, Mark Hartley's a fucking great documentary filmmaker. Like, he needs to come back, man. I miss that dude. I know he's doing like real films now.
He's doing one.
He's working
He's
on
doing
one.
a new doc.
He's working on
doing-
called Sweat It Out, yeah.
Yes.
Was he not gonna? I don't know whether to say this because I met him.
I can cut it out if you decide you regret what you're about to say.
No, it's just I don't know if it was announced or anything, if it was a secret, or if he's still doing it. But wasn't he going to do a Hammer documentary?
There's a couple. That was one. There's a couple that he's cut trailers and stuff for as proof of concepts, and it's all just about like any filmmaker. He's just waiting for financing to come through for each of these projects. So the one that just got up is Sweat It Out, which is all about the music scene in that kind of early 80s, 70s.
The Australian music scene.
Music scene.
Yeah.
That kind of accompanied the Ozploitation
Right.
film kind of period. But he's got once again, I don't know if it's been announced or anything, but I've seen a couple of the proof of concept trailers. He's got like one on female martial artists, and he's got one on he did a fantastic one on
It's Machete Maiden, sort of like spiritual peasant.
Yeah. But and he did a really fantastic one on Buzomania, what's it called? Russ Meyer. But the problem was they couldn't get the rights to the films. There was something to do with getting the clip rights and stuff for that.
Right.
Because it's
the other thing about a Charles Band thing is I think that there's a good chance that we could get him to let us use clips from some or his full moon films. So it's like kind of a no-brainer if you don't have to pay for clips, but you never know, he might want money for the clips, so because he's a bit like a money guy,
Yeah. And look, here's a box of clips I happened to find in my warehouse that
I was trying to shoehorn that in there, mate.
It's what an amazing find that I've just found from
I was about to say, when you make your film, you need to hide them in a warehouse for a while and then bust them open, and say, "Hey, look what we've discovered."
Like when we got him for the box set, we were only allowed to ask him 3 questions per film. There's 4 films in the box set. He said only 3 questions, and then Justin Beam was putting it all together for me, and we did a whole thing on Video Zone. That was the big kind of takeaway. Was the video thing, but we had a lot of trouble getting nailing Charlie down, and we tried when we did Puppet Master The Littlest Reich. We were basically told by Delasonier that don't approach Charlie, don't talk to Charlie, it's not going to go well. I don't think he liked someone else doing the Puppet Master films. I think there was some kind of bone of contention there.
The film is riding itself right now.
Yeah.
I just went to see his new film when we were in LA. We went to a special screening, a cast and crew screening of his newest film, which is called Death Streamer. He's still on form. It was really good.
I don't know what that means. Take that however you want.
The part about it which I don't understand is I get low budget filmmaking in the 80s, and even though it was low budget, it all looked pretty good. Like it still had practical effects and car crashes and all that sort of stuff. And then you go into the 2000s and the 2010s, and the low budget stuff with the CGI effects and stuff all looks really low budget. You're like, but they're
That's so true.
they're shooting
There
with
is
the
some,
level of budgets.
yeah, there's some sort of weird, because if anything, you have more money when you're not shooting on film.
Yeah.
But things like, maybe it's just the look of film. Like films like Puppet Master actually look quite good. Like they're not bad. It's probably, even Trancers. I'm not a huge fan of Trancers, but I think lots of people are. But as opposed to like
shots on film, their budgets were still probably 10 times what his films cost now.
Now,
yeah. Spending hundreds of thousands.
The cast is so much better. Look at the cast.
Tens of thousands.
Yeah. Look at the cast of Puppet Master. It's like Paul Le Mat and William Hickey, and like they're all like good actors. Like it's not, like. I mean, that's what I loved about these 90s films. Like going back and watching, I finally did watch the first 2 Final Destination films.
Well,
the third one is the best.
Sorry?
The third one is the best.
I just started the third one before we before it came on. I will say that look, as much as I did like the Ferris wheel, the roller coaster destruction, it does not hold a candle to that road.
What?
Scene.
The log scene is definitely the best.
The log scene, that whole thing is one of the most amazing. One of the most amazing.
That's the one that James Wong didn't direct.
Yeah.
I think it shows that he directed 3 and 1, and he didn't direct 2.
And do 2. Yeah.
The 5 is very good as well when you get to the collapsing bridge. Woo.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Well, we're playing the Final Destination, the 2009 one at the festival, the 3D one.
Yeah. Oh my God, is that where the cinema explodes?
Yes. Yeah, and it starts with the car racing track.
Yeah, that's not
good.
God. That's the worst one.
That's not good.
I think because it was 3D, and we've been doing a lot of 3D stuff, and we're like, yeah, let's that comes
the gimmick, Ben. You felt the gimmick.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. But like, I just love the casts of those movies. Like seeing all these people who I guess would have been, teen TV stars at the time. And they come into horrors, and they're all like young and baby faced. They, the ridiculousness of Ali Larter playing a kind of mousy nerd character, and you're like, they didn't even let you try it in Varsity Blues, and you're going to try it in Final Destination? Is outrageous.
I love her, and I think it's so funny. In number 2, she sort of comes back as a bit more of a hard girl, and then obviously she goes into Resident Evils after that, I think.
Yeah, right. I found it. I did find it odd because when it starts out in Final Destination, she's got brown hair, and then when she finds her confidence, she dyes it blonde, and right at the end.
Well, she's trying to avoid death. She's got the bleach going in her hair.
Got the bleach in her hair, and then she's in like the padded cell at the start of number 2, and she's still.
Maybe she went crazy and couldn't dye her hair, and blonde's her natural hair color.
Natural color, yeah.
Bleach blonde, yeah.
Well, Ben, I hope I'm not throwing you under the bus here by saying, do you want to give people the dates that this is playing at Monsterfest?
I know it's playing in every state on Saturday the 5th, except Melbourne. Although it might actually be playing Saturday the 5th.
No, it is playing all of them on 5th.
On Saturday the 5th.
So wherever you are in those states, you can see it, whether you're in Melbourne or not.
That's right. Melbourne, Sydney. It just sucks if you're in Canberra, or in Tasmania, or you're in the Northern Territory. Eat it.
But you know what? They position Canberra where it is because it's smack bang between Melbourne and Sydney. So pick a direction and go see it.
Yeah, well, so, yeah, that's right. It's only a 3-hour drive from Canberra to
I have
Sydney.
to interrupt. Phil never said what he's working on now, and I feel
Oh,
bad.
yeah, what are you working on?
So I've just finished the Blair Witch documentary with Jed Shepherd, which is out in November, which is fun. So lots and lots of behind the scenes stuff in that. And I'm also working on an Italian horror documentary at the moment, which is currently being edited. So about 80s Italian splatter films.
Oof.
Lovely.
Yes.
There still was the J&B still in the 80s? Did that come through still in the 80s?
No, that's more of a 70s thing. Yeah, because he kind of moved towards America in the 80s.
Yeah.
And got left behind.
It's real. I found that was one of the. I mean, once you know that they didn't shoot with sound, you kind of pick it up. But I always find it interesting that there's so many American and English stars in the giallos and the Italian horrors and stuff, and still it's dubbed. But
yeah, they are all the same. All that. Done by the same man.
Yeah. Like we had to when we released. I think The Story of O, and we had. I think this was years and years ago. People were going, "Oh, is it the original French version or is it the?" And I'm like, "There's no original language version. It was shot silent, and then they just did voiceover for it. So every version is dubbed in some way or another."
Yeah, same with all the Hong Kong movies, man. It's just a thing then, wasn't it? It's when shooting hard fast. It's like, can we afford sound? No, fix it in post.
Well, the Astron 6 guys, when they made the editor, they really wanted to do it post sound, and they said they couldn't do it because when they showed it to people, they just thought it was out of sync. It's just that
in QC.
So that time period is gone. That moment, you can't do it anymore. I mean, Netflix are really trying because now you can do the CGI thing with the mouth. It makes it look like
dubbing all their shows, aren't they? Which is quite funny. The trailer just starts and be dubbed. It's like, why?
Awesome. We're going to wind things up. I want to thank both of you for taking the time out to talk to us about this. This is a call to action to everybody to get along to Monster Fest and see the movie. It's fantastic, and it's a real good deep dive into an area that really hasn't been explored yet in documentaries. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having us, and I hope lots of Australians go and see the doc.
Yes.
Each decade has its own reaction to the films before. How do you make something different?
More intense and more bloody and more gory, more tits, more everything.
I think we just can't help ourselves. I think we're all a little bit sick.
割とこうちゃんと子供を殺す映画をやらないとダメだっていうふうに思って。
What the fuck was going on in the 2000s? You know, are the kids all right?
The things that we think are not making an impression maybe will someday.
Being the end of the millennium was sort of a harbinger of darkness to come.
I was less worried about the ghost in the machine other than this one in the sky.
And it was like 28 Days Later. London was just empty.
I mean, making movies was always like that dream that you never think will happen because it seems impossible.
The idea that horror is anywhere, it can happen at any time, was truly significant.